Good morning, UMass. Today is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. I hope everybody is doing well. Please check your Google Classroom assignment for today's assignment, these three problems, and then an all-star challenge problem with which we will go over after this video. All right, so you should have already tried these. So if you haven't, press pause now, solve these three problems in your Google Classroom, and then watch this to see how you did before you submit it. All right, so number one says, which of the following are both polygons and quadrilaterals? So they need to be both polygons, hey Charlie, and quadrilaterals. Okay, so you need to know the definition of these two words, and I put it over here. So a polygon is a closed shape with two dimensions. So they can't be 3D, it has to be 2D, and they need to be a closed shape. So, meaning that it can't be open like B. See how that's not closed? The ends need to all touch each other like that's closed. This one is not closed. So it's not a polygon if it's not closed, okay? So it needs to be a closed shape and it needs to be 2D. That's a polygon. A quadrilateral is a four-sided polygon. So quad, from the word quadrilateral, quad means four, kind of like cuatro means four in Spanish, right? Quad means four, and lateral means side. So quadrilateral has four sides. Okay, so let's look through these. Which ones are both polygons and quadrilaterals? So A is not right because this is three-sided. So yes, it's a polygon, but it is not a quadrilateral. It's a polygon because it's only two dimensions, right? There's no width. It's not 3D, it's just two dimensions, this way and this way. And it is a closed shape, so it is a polygon, but it's not a quadrilateral because there's only three sides. Okay, now B, it would be a quadrilateral if this was closed, right? You might look at this and say, well, there's four sides, but it is not a polygon because a polygon needs to be a closed shape. So a quadrilateral, since it's a four-sided polygon, also needs to be a closed shape. So B is not correct because it's not closed. See how this part right there is open? So it is not a polygon. And it's not a quadrilateral for that reason as well. So C, it's closed, it's 2D. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, so it's a quadrilateral. So C is correct. It is a polygon. It's a closed shape with two dimensions, and it is a quadrilateral because there are four sides. So far we have C as being correct. Now D is not a polygon because it doesn't have two dimensions. It needs to be a closed shape that's two dimensions. This is 3D. See how there's three dimensions, length, height, and then width, like how thick it is here, how wide it is. There's three dimensions. That's a cube, so it cannot be correct because it's not a polygon. It's 3D. Okay, and the last one, E. E, let's see, is it a closed shape? Yes, it's a polygon. It's a closed two-dimensional shape. If it has four sides, then it's also a quadrilateral, four sides. So yes, E is also a polygon and a quadrilateral. So the correct answers were C and E. Got to work through all of them. Even though you found C was right, it says which of the following are both. We're not sure if it's just one. You got to really carefully work through all of the options. And we found that two of them are correct. C and E are both polygons and quadrilaterals. Okay, if you got that, give yourself some snaps. If not, I want you to look at those definitions of polygons and quadrilaterals, and we'll try another one like that later this week. Okay, number two, which of the following expressions have a product greater than 2/5? Select the two correct choices. So we need to choose two, and I'll put it over here too to make sure that I don't forget. Choose two. Because if I just choose one of them, you don't get any credit. You got to get both of them. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. Which of the following expressions, don't be confused about what an expression is. These are all expressions. So which one of these have a product? So product is the answer to a multiplication problem. So we're going to look down here. Yep, they're all multiplication problems. Greater than 2/5 is the key. Which one of these is going to have a product, an answer to the multiplication problem, that's greater than 2/5? Okay, so I noticed that they all have 2/5 in them. Every one of them is a multiplication problem times 2/5. So now let's look more closely. It needs to be greater than 2/5. So 2/5 times 3/2. So since 3/2 is greater than 1, right? 2/2. If you had this whole cut into 2 pieces and you have 1/2, 2/2, then you have the whole thing. So 2/2 is equal to 1 whole. Okay, so if 2/2 is equal to 1 whole, that means 3/2 is more than 1 whole, because you have to have another half. There's 1/2, 2/2, 3/2 is really 1.5. So we're multiplying 2/5 times a fraction that's greater than 1. It's going to be greater than the fraction we are multiplying times the other fraction that's greater than 1, right? So it's greater than 2/5 because we're multiplying 2/5 by a fraction that's greater than 1. So that means 2/5, it's going to be greater. The product of this is going to be greater than 2/5 because we took 2/5, we multiplied it. If you multiplied it times 1, it would be equal to 2/5. We multiplied it times a fraction that's more than 1, so it's going to be greater than where it started, which was at 2/5. So A is correct. That's our first correct choice, A. Now we have 2/5 times 1/3. Since 1/3 is less than 1, we're multiplying 2/5 times a fraction that's less than 1. It's only 1/3. So it's going to get smaller when we multiply it times 2/5. 2/5 times 1 would be 2/5. So 2/5 times a fraction that's less than 1 is going to be less than 2/5. So B is incorrect. Now we'll go to C. 2/5 times 3/4. Again, 3/4 is less than 1. So if we're multiplying this fraction times another fraction that's less than 1, it's going to make the original fraction smaller. So 2/5 times 1 would be 2/5. So 2/5 times less than 1 is going to be less than 2/5, not greater than 2/5. So not less than, it's got to be greater than 2/5. So far we found just A. Now let's go to D. 2/5 times 6/6. 6/6 is equal to 1. So if you do 2/5 times 1, it still is equal to 2/5. So it's not greater than 2/5, it's equal to 2/5. 2/5 times 1 is still going to be 2/5. So that's not greater than. So even though we are choosing 2, we've only found 1 and we're down to the last one, I'm still going to make sure that it's right. So 2/5 times, this is a fraction that's greater than 1. It's 4 wholes. 4 holes, and each of those holes has just one big piece. So it's like 4 complete holes. Right? 4 over 1. 4 holes, and each one of these holes is not cut up into any pieces, just one big piece, right? So 4 over 1 is multiplying 2/5 times 4. So since we're multiplying 2/5 times a fraction that's greater than 1, the answer is going to be greater than 2/5. Okay, so the two answers are A and E for this one. Because we multiplied 2/5 times a fraction that's greater than 1, then it's going to get greater. We multiplied it times a fraction that's greater than 1, it's going to get bigger. So A and E are the correct choices for that one. Give yourself some snaps if you got that. Good work. And last problem, number 3. Find the difference between 6 2/8 and 3 3/4. So the difference is the answer to a subtraction problem. So we are going to subtract 6 2/8 minus 3 3/4. So did you subtract? Because we're finding the difference. That's the answer to a subtraction problem. So make sure, if you didn't do that, pause now and go back and make sure you subtract these to find the difference. 6 2/8 minus 3 3/4. 6 2/8 minus 3 3/4. We're ready to go. I'm going to circle this to make sure that I subtract. Okay, so the problem here, this is a 4. We cannot subtract eighths minus fourths. So we have to turn them both into the same denominator. So since 8 is already 8, we can multiply 4 to get it to be 8. So we don't actually have to change this one. We'll keep that one as 8. We're going to turn this denominator into 8. That way we can then do the subtraction, 2/8 minus this number of 8s. So 4 times what gets us to 8? Because we're going to multiply it times a fraction that's equal to 1. Kind of like what we just looked at. We want to know what fraction can we multiply this so that we're not going to really change its value. We're going to make an equivalent fraction by multiplying times a fraction that's equal to 1. So 4 times what is 8? 4 times 2 is 8. So we have to multiply 3/4 times 2/2 because 2/2 is equal to 1. So we're not going to really change it. When we multiply 3/4 times 1, It's going to look different, but it's going to still be equal to 3/4. So 4 times 2 is 8, so 3 times 2 is 6/8. So 3/4 and 6/8 are exactly the same value. All we did was multiply it times 1. That way we can now have 8ths minus 8ths. Okay? But the trouble is we have 6 and 2/8 minus 3 and 6/8. So you can't do 2/8 minus 6/8. If I only have 2/8, I can't take 6/8 away. So I'm going to need to borrow. You understand that? If I only had 2/8, if this is my model with 8ths, if I only have 2/8, I don't have 6/8 to take away because I only have 2 of them. So I can only take 2/8 away. I can't take 6/8 away. There's only 2 of them to start with, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to borrow 1 from the whole number. We're going to take 1 from the 6 and make it 5. And then we're going to add 1 to the fractional part, okay? Because all we're doing is trading. We'll take 1 whole from here, we'll subtract it from here, and we'll add 1 whole to the fraction because 8/8 is equal to 1. So we're subtract 1 from the wholes, add 1 to the fractions. Now 2/8 plus 8/8 makes 10/8. So we have 5 and 10/8 minus 3 and 6/8. Now we can do the subtraction. 10/8 minus 6/8, you just do 10 minus 6 is 4, and 8ths minus 8ths are still 8ths. So the denominators, once they're the same, you keep them the same, and you just do subtract the numerators. 10 minus 6 was 4/8, and then 5 minus 3 is 2 wholes. It's not 6 anymore because we borrowed 1 from there to add 1 here. So now we have 2 and 4/8, and in simplest form, we can divide 4 and 8 both by 4. So we're going to divide this by a fraction that's equal to 1. We're going to divide it by 4/4. And it's just going to give us an equivalent fraction that's in simplest form. So 8 divided by 4 is 2, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. So the answer is 2.5. The difference between 6 and 2/8 and 3 and 3/4 is 2.5. All right, if you had 2 and 4/8, then good job. It didn't tell you had to simplify, but that should be a step that we all do anyways. So if you didn't get it to simplest form to 1/2, that's one step where I want you to just look every time you end up with an answer of like 2 and 4/8. You always got to check, can I simplify the fraction? Can I divide those both by the same number? That way I'm actually dividing by 1. Just like 4/4 is equal to 1, and we're going to just simplify that, and it makes 1/2. So 2 and 1/2 is the best answer there. And that's it for today. Give yourself some snaps. Nice work. Try the All-Star Challenge, and I'll show you a video in a little bit for how to solve it. Have a great day.